I think I said it early when C was out the very first time. While we don't like it, sometimes it can be a blessing in disguise because everybody else finds themselves, right? And no one is afraid to make the big play, offensively or defensively. And when one person doesn't have it, somebody else does. And I think it makes this really, really difficult to scout when that happens.
It started with a press conference that should have been about unity, resilience, and hope. Stephanie White stood before reporters, her voice trembling with emotion as she spoke about Arie McDonald and Sydney Colson's devastating season-ending injuries. She called them really good people, praised their impact on and off the court, and expressed deep heartbreak for their loss. But to many, this wasn't just a coach showing compassion. It was the beginning of a troubling double standard. Just months earlier, when Caitlin Clark suffered a groin injury that sidelined her, White's reaction was markedly different. There were no visible signs of sorrow, no acknowledgement of the void left by one of the most impactful players in the league. Instead, White called Clark's absence a blessing in disguise. That phrase hasn't just lingered, it's become the spark behind a storm of controversy engulfing the Indiana Fever organization. The contrast between these two moments is stark. Emotional investment for role players, but clinical indifference for the superstar who revitalized the franchise. Fans haven't forgotten. In fact, they've replayed the footage repeatedly, trying to make sense of how a coach could appear so disconnected from the very player who transformed not just her team, but the broader WNBA landscape. This isn't merely about one offhand remark. It's about what that remark suggests. Stephanie White's tone and language when discussing Clark's injury felt less like a coach navigating a tough moment and more like someone subtly revealing a deeper agenda. It raised uncomfortable questions. Does she truly value Clark's contributions? Is there a resistance to acknowledging what Clark represents, not just in terms of talent, but in cultural and commercial influence? For many fans, the blessing in disguise comment was personal. It echoed a familiar feeling, being a top performer in any setting, only to sense that your absence is welcomed rather than missed. The implication was clear. Without Clark, others could finally step up. But what that narrative ignores is the reality on the court. Clark's presence doesn't suppress her teammates. It elevates them. Her court vision, gravity, and playmaking open up opportunities that simply don't exist when she's off the floor. Since her injury, the performance of players like Aaliyah Boston and Lexi Hull has dipped. The spacing is tighter, shots are harder, and the offense is less fluid. The numbers tell the story that White's words tried to obscure. The blessing theory collapses under the weight of the evidence. That's what has fans so outraged. Because this isn't just about strategy or locker room dynamics, it's about narrative, perception, and respect. Caitlin Clark is not merely a rookie. She is a phenomenon. Her arrival brought packed arenas, unprecedented media attention, surging merchandise sales, and renewed excitement for women's basketball. She made Indiana a must-watch team overnight. To downplay her absence, to frame it as an opportunity instead of a loss, feels tone-deaf at best and willfully dismissive at worst. And this wasn't a rookie coach misspeaking. Stephanie White is a veteran, someone who understands how her words shape public perception and team culture. That's why the backlash has been swift and unrelenting. Social media exploded. Hashtags like La Fire White and Us Respect Caitlin began trending. Fans, diehards, casuals, even neutrals, expressed disbelief and anger. As people dug deeper, they began identifying what felt like a pattern. Since White took over, the offensive scheme has shifted in a direction many believe limits Clark's effectiveness. Gone is the motion-heavy up-tempo style that plays to her strengths. In its place is a slower, more deliberate system that minimizes her touches and dulls her creativity. To critics, this isn't just a philosophical decision. It looks like an intentional attempt to dim the brightest light the franchise has ever had. And that light matters, economically, culturally, historically. Clark is not just a basketball player. She's a movement. She brings money, media, and momentum. Her influence lifts everyone around her. When that kind of force is treated with indifference, it doesn't just alienate fans. It risks undermining the foundation of the team's success. So this moment has become more than a soundbite. It's a symbol of something bigger. A coach seemingly unwilling to embrace the generational talent handed to her. A star who deserves more than muted praise. A fan base unwilling to accept what they see as institutional disrespect. And now, the Fever find themselves at a crossroads, one where silence, spin, or strategy won't be enough. Because in sports, as in life, how you respond to greatness says everything about who you are. Disrespect. It's a betrayal. And betrayals have a way of leaving scars that don't fade easily. The accusations of favoritism didn't appear overnight. Observers have noticed for months how Stephanie White seems more animated and invested when discussing certain role players. When Natasha Howard was acquired, many questioned the fit alongside Clark's style of play. Yet White seemed determined to make the chemistry work rather than adapt the system to her generational star. In every public interaction, the disparity in tone between how she speaks about Clark versus others has been impossible to ignore. Now, with the injury comments, the suspicion has hardened into belief. Ego is an insidious force in sports. Great. Coaches know when to step back and let their stars shine. Others can't resist the urge to remain the focal point, determined to prove that their system, not individual brilliance, is the key to success. Critics argue that White belongs in the latter category, that she resents the idea that Indiana's rise could be credited primarily to Clark. And if that's true, then every strategic decision, every substitution pattern, and every post-game quote takes on new meaning. They become part of a larger, more troubling narrative. The fallout from that perception extends far beyond the locker room. Sponsors, broadcasters, and league officials are paying close attention. Clark's marketability is a league-wide asset. Any situation that jeopardizes her performance or tarnishes her image affects far more than one team. The WNBA has fought for mainstream recognition for decades, and Clark has been the breakthrough, an athlete whose appeal cuts across demographics and brings new fans into the fold. So when her own coach appears to downplay her value, the optics aren't just bad, they're catastrophic. Inside the team, the dynamics are just as fragile. Players notice how their coach talks about each of them. And when the face of the franchise receives less empathy than bench players, it sends a chilling message. That message can break trust, create quiet resentment, and fracture a locker room. Once that happens, repairing it becomes nearly impossible. For a young player like Clark, this could define her experience in Indiana for years to come. What makes this situation even more frustrating for fans is Clark's professionalism throughout it all. She hasn't complained publicly, hasn't thrown her coach or teammates under the bus. She's kept her focus on the team, even as the system shifted away from what made her great. She adapted, played through the discomfort, and led by example. And yet, her loyalty and humility have not been reciprocated with the respect they deserve. She's been treated like an interchangeable part, rather than the generational talent she is. Now the Fever's front office is under the microscope. Allowing this dynamic to continue sends a dangerous message, not just to Clark, but to every current and future player considering Indiana. In professional sports, perception shapes reality. If players and agents perceive that the organization won't protect or empower its stars, that belief becomes fact in the free agent market. The long-term consequences could be severe, especially now at a time when momentum is on the league's side. This was supposed to be the Fever's moment to build something lasting. Clark's arrival gave them unprecedented attention, fan support, and opportunity. Instead, they're now mired in controversy, with fractured trust inside the team and public backlash growing louder by the day. This could be a turning point. The franchise can either confront the situation, acknowledge the damage, and commit to building around Clark, or they can continue to let it fester until it becomes irreversible. The comparisons to other coaching greats are hard to ignore. Phil Jackson didn't celebrate when Michael Jordan was injured. He built an offense to maximize Jordan's brilliance. Greg Popovich didn't treat Tim Duncan's absence as a moment for others to find themselves. He created a culture that protected and uplifted his star. In that context, White's approach feels not just outdated, but fundamentally flawed. For Clark, the stakes couldn't be higher. She's at the beginning of what could be a legendary career. But how far she goes will depend heavily on the system, the culture, and the leadership around her. A misaligned coach, a rigid scheme, or a lack of support could limit her ceiling. And that wouldn't just be a loss for Indiana, it would be a loss for the sport. The urgency can't be overstated. In a short WNBA season, every game carries weight. Every misstep in managing a superstar matters more. White's blessing in disguise remark wasn't just an unfortunate turn of phrase. It was a glimpse into a mindset that may be fundamentally at odds with maximizing Caitlin Clark's impact, and that's something the Fever and the league can no longer afford to ignore.